The journey didn't really begin with technology for me. It began over in America with an idea to climb a mountain and propose to my wife when I reached the top. So I set out early in the morning to climb a mountain with an engagement ring in hand, and for the first time in my life I was finding things incredibly difficult. I'd already lost my sight at this point. You know, I couldn't really walk down streets or anything. It was very hard, and I thought, you know, I'll get to the top of this mountain, I'll ask her to ride me. And as we were going up, I was having to use my wife as a guide, and it was becoming increasingly difficult. I was starting to fall over things and trip, and it was sheer drops, thousands of feet to the edge, so I decided to stop. And stopping for the first time in my life because I couldn't see was just so difficult to live with. I'd stopped and I couldn't accept it. So, you know, I still proposed to my wife, didn't get to the top, which was nice, and she said yes. So while we were away, quickly went to Vegas and got married. So it was a nice ending overall, but when I returned to England, you know, I still had this nagging thing in my mind that I'd stopped just because I couldn't see. And I really didn't like the thought of that. So one day, when I was sat on my sofa, I thought, maybe I can go outside and run. So this time I had my smartphone. So behind my house there's some soccer fields. So I positioned myself between the goalposts and just ran up and down the pitch, which was really cool. You know, it was the first time I'd been out and done something independent with fitness. And the phone would tell me how far I'd run and how fast, and I managed to get up to 1 mile. And at that point, that was the furthest ever run. 1 mile, it seemed like a great distance. But it was starting to become a little bit challenging because there was a lot of dog walkers. They assumed I could see, and I assumed they would move. So it was time to find somewhere new to run. So with a little bit of arm twisting, I persuaded my wife to take me to a closed road, which was near our house and very close to an airport. And basically, I just got out my phone and just ran up and down a piece of straight road, nothing to run into. It was great. And I was using Runkeeper on my phone, and it would tell me I'd run 0.3 miles, 0.6 miles, 0.9 miles. And that's when I was starting to notice that I was always hitting the grates on the floor whenever it gave a certain distance. So I was thinking to myself, you know, maybe I could piece together what I feel underfoot and the distance markers. And there were some yellow lines. I was running along the yellow lines. I could feel the line with my foot. And then I got to around 3 miles, and it was getting so boring. A straight road is just mind-numbing. So I built myself up thinking that maybe I could just step out onto this road, follow the yellow lines of the dual carriageway, and just run down the road. So one day, I went out, built my confidence up running down the piece of straight road, stepped out onto the dual carriageway, and just ran down the road. I got to the bottom and I just burst into tears. I couldn't believe that, you know, I'd managed to run solo outdoors on the open roads. Well, there was one problem. I needed to quickly get back before my wife discovered what I'd done. So I quickly ran back. She met me at the closed road, and for the next few weeks I pretended that I was running on the closed road. But what I was really doing is I was learning to plan out a route. So I'd run down to the bottom of the dual carriageway, step onto the next piece of road, and begin to run. And that wasn't easy at first. You know, I'd run into lampposts, I'd run into road signs, traffic lights, you know, man at work signs, cones, trees. But once you run into something once, I could pair it with the distance marker from my phone, so I'd never run into it again. And after a short while, I'd sort of managed to learn a route, and I'd paired things like the camber of the pavement. So if one foot was sort of lower than the other, I knew which side of the pavement I was, and if I touched some grass with one foot, I knew I needed to drift one way. And if the phone said I'd, you know, gone a certain distance, I knew to look out for a dip in the pavement and then turn right. And it was getting to the point where it was time to tell my wife. So I told my wife, and then I was quickly banned from running. So it took a while of moping at breakfast before she caved in and agreed to take me back out. So I started running back out, and then I managed to run 10 miles. 10 miles was a massive, massive distance. And then the question was raised, how far can I run? So I went home, entered a 100-mile race, and again, my wife wasn't happy about that. So the next sort of 6 months was occupied with really pushing to see how far I could train and how far I could go. And around that time, technology was improving, and now my wife could do live tracking for where I was, so she saw that as a bit of safety. If I collapsed or something, she could come and collect me. And that did happen a few times, but she was able to find me, thanks to the phone. And then it was coming close to when I was actually going to run this 100 miles. Now in my sort of head, I'd planned to get a team together, which I had. I'd amassed a few friends who could cycle distance and things like that. But then one of them broke an ankle. One of them, his wife, was due to give birth the week of the race, and a few other sort of things, and I lost the entire team. So again, I just turned to technology, put something on Twitter saying, would anybody like to help me get across here? It's 100 miles. Who wants to join in? And it took a couple of days, and I had a team of 20 people that were willing to turn up on the day and get me from point A to point B. So the race arrived, and after 6 months of training on perfect flat at the airport, the race was in the Cotswolds. So if people don't know, the Cotswolds is really hilly. I only discovered that when I arrived. So I wasn't used to running up hills, and they kept on telling me I was at the top of the hill, but it really didn't feel like I was at the top of the hill. So after around 50 miles, I just had a total breakdown emotionally, and I couldn't continue. I just sat down thinking, this is it. This is as far as I've come. 50 miles was still, a phenomenal distance, but I told myself, can I live with stopping just because I'm in a little bit of pain and I'm upset? And I couldn't live with that, so I told myself I'd keep on going till I couldn't stand. So I stood back up, and I did 33 more miles before I was removed from the race because I could no longer stand. But for me, the 83 miles was, a great achievement. I'd done something fantastic, something impossible. I'd taken a phone, learnt to run outdoors, and then ran 83 miles in 6 months. It was fantastic. But I was taught a good lesson in the Cotswolds. I need to run on hills. But because I live near an airport, everything is just flat. So again, I turned to technology, and I found a treadmill that uses something called iFit. And iFit ties into Google Maps. So you can map any location in the world, and then the treadmill matches the exact inclines. So my wife would plot routes in really hilly cities like San Francisco, and I'd begin to practice inclines. So again, I was able to use technology to bridge the gap of something I couldn't do. So in terms of, what does the future hold? I'm currently looking for people to help me begin 2 new adventures. One of those adventures is New York City Marathon, because I've never actually run a marathon. I've run further, I've run shorter, but I've never actually managed to run a marathon. So I was lucky enough to get a slot in this year's New York Marathon. But New York is tantalizingly close to Boston. And Boston is the home of Runkeeper. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to run from Runkeeper to the start of New York, which is just over 300 miles, and then run the marathon. And then I thought, well, it'd be great as well if I used technology to do all of this. So rather than use a team of guides, the plan is to fly into Boston and then using things like Twitter and other social media, connect with enough people to get from Boston to New York. And technology, has become far better from when I first started running. So now I'm at the point where I can do a lot of live tracking of my actual run while I'm running, create content like tweets and video and audio and real-time heart rate. So I'm going to try and generate as much real-time information while running through, smartphones or other devices as I can. And then the other adventure is, I've learnt to run solo, but I've never been able to compete solo. I have to, use a guide to help me get around the course because I can't memorise 50 miles. It's tough to memorise the route that I did, which is 5. So then I thought to myself, where in the world could a blind man run and not run into anything? That's the desert. There's nothing to run into. I can just run around there. It'll be great. I could run as far as I wanted to. So I thought to myself, there's only 2 real challenges here. I just need to find, a desert and someone who's crazy enough to sign off the insurance. So I found those 2 things. I found a desert, and then I found a guy that was crazy enough to sign off on the insurance as a race director. So it was a desert race. I was, I'll do it. It's the Sahara. So this is the Sahara. It's flat. There's nothing. But it turns out this is the Sahara. I didn't realise there were so many obstacles to run into. So there's quite a few obstacles. Is that still the desert? Yeah? Okay, right. So the plan is to still go out there and use technology, because quite interesting, this race is what they call like a GPS point-to-point. So I arrive at one location, I'm given the next set of GPS coordinates, and then I just run to that point. So that's relatively easy to navigate as a blind person, because phones nowadays have, the electronic compass and the bearings, so I can just run from point to point. And then I'm going to use maybe my cane or hopefully some other technology to avoid the substantial obstacles that someone seems to have put out, which is great. So, yeah, that's the next adventure. What always happens for me is, as technology improves, it enables me to do more things. So the one thing that I've been really interested in at the minute is Google Glass. Because I can, do these amazing runs and I can run great distances, but for me, getting to the local shop is still very difficult. Even more so, I came to London early this week and I don't really come to London very often, so I don't know the area. So I have to rely on technology to get me from anywhere to anywhere, really. So I was able to use Glass to get me to Starbucks. Is that a picture of Starbucks? Yes, right, okay. So Glass was able to get me to Starbucks, which, is fantastic. I even took that photo wearing Glass. But for me, what's more exciting is the future possibilities that Glass could offer. Wouldn't it be great if I could walk in there, Glass could help me, navigate internally, avoid all obstacles, and then I could look at a menu and it could read the menu to me. These are things that I haven't been able to do since I was 15. So being able to read a menu or even navigate internally would be life-changing. And then while I was also out with Glass, I just thought I'd take a picture of perhaps what could be the next self-driving car in the future for me. So I think we need to move away from those small cars and move more towards the Lamborghini. That'd be great. All right, so thank you. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. Okay.